Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming out. I'm Chris Hager, ULI Chair with Langen Engineering and Environmental Services. I want to just say a quick welcome, a quick thanks to Matt Whitteman and Paul Taroni for putting the program together, and I'm going to hand it over to them. I'll make one comment, just on the title. Not your grandfather's dorm. When I saw that, I thought it should be not your dorm. It wasn't any of our dorms. It wasn't my dorm. I went out, I'll never forget, I went out to a ULI event out in Arizona, and I went to Arizona State University. And I went into one of these complexes, and I went to the top of the one building that was going to be used as a student dorm. Actually, it was actually off campus. And if any of you have seen Rodney Dangerfield's Back to School, it was like Rodney Dangerfield was going to be up on that top level. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and then he and Paul are going to take it from here. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everybody. I'm Matt Whitteman with W.S. Cumbie Builders and Construction Managers. I'm also a member of the ULI Philadelphia Young Leaders Council. Thank you all for attending this morning's program. W.S. Cumbie Builders and Construction Managers, along with U.S. Bank Commercial Real Estate, is this morning's sponsors. And everything we do is made possible by our sponsors. I'd also like to thank our Young Leaders annual sponsors, TD Bank, Commonwealth Land Title Insurance Company, Tim Haas, and the Daniel M. D'Elia Center for Real Estate at Villanova School of Business, our host for this morning's event. So with today's sold-out attendance, I can see everyone is eager to hear more about the future of student housing in and around the Philadelphia region. So without further ado, I'll introduce our panel for today. We have Rana Johansson, Senior Vice President of Campus Real Estate Development for University Student Living. Robert Morrow, Vice President of Facilities Management for Villanova University. Chuck Redlovich, Principal and Director of Higher Education Practice for Ewing Cole. And our moderator is Paul Sennert, Director of Development Management for University of Pennsylvania. Let's give them all a warm ULI welcome.
My role as a moderator is basically to direct traffic here. But I'm also going to say a couple of things, panel, just to kind of be provocative and to get our juices going this morning. You guys have all had your coffee, so everybody's warmed up. And by the way, it's great to see so many friends and colleagues here. It's great to be here. Let me just predicate my comments by saying the student housing market has really become a definable product. That 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that was not the case. You see, what I would call a sea change in the business. Let's go back 10, 15 years where student housing, if it traded, was trading at a discount to value. And that's because people were afraid of the product. High maintenance, big turnover, the risk that the university or institutional support was going to do something really stupid like change their policy overnight and really disrupt the market. So it tended to discourage people's participation. And we can comment on that. It was also fundamentally a build-to-suit market. This is how it worked. Universities had these cumbersome buying policies to procure construction. They would use a developer and sort of call up and say, here's a piece of land, you build the product, 100% debt financing, tax exempt, world revenue bonds. It was essentially a build-to-suit product, but it was an end run around the university or institutional procurement methods. That's clearly not the case today. And there was a concern about the sort of backroom politics and favoritism of the boards of these institutions. So I think developers tended to steer clear of it. But there was also this sort of gray area of financing where, think about this. Commonwealth of Georgia issues 30-year bonds to build dorms, and yet the legislature, year after year, had to approve the debt service financing. How many people know a bond lawyer and think about the risks of sort of political mayhem on the front line, but yet they sort of said, forget about it. They would never do that. And they financed these deals and went along. So there's a little bit of a wink and nod in the capital markets about the student housing space. You guys can comment on that. Finally, now it's viewed as a very, very positive sector. Evidence this morning. Look at the crowd. A lot of interest in student housing, a lot of capital flowing into student housing, and at least in University City, Rhonda, lots and lots of new product. You can see developers and markets. There are conferences on student housing. There are publications on student housing. There are new, publications that talk about value and process. This is all evidence, if you went to this business school, of a definable market. Clearly, there's an arms race underway. And that's, we're going to talk about amenities and what I would call an arms race. I picked this up yesterday at Drexel. I just happened to be walking through Drexel. And this is, pitching a deal. New media and gaming lounge. New upgraded study rooms. New computer center. New 24-hour fitness center. New upgraded loaded gaming room. Hardwood style, carpet, bathrooms, furniture, sectional sofas. Kevin, how much does all this stuff cost, right? So, there's an arms race. And yet, before my cynicism sets in on this crowd, I'm going to ask you to do something, because there's something really great about that experience of going to college, something so fundamental in our lives, that student housing taps into that weird, undefinable space. How many of you can remember the first apartment that you lived in when you were in school? I can, of course. I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, but I can remember that apartment. And so there is something that's really, really different about the student housing space that's quite different than everything else. So, with those as sort of background comments, were those provocative enough? Sea change, arms race, got some big words out there. Okay. I'm going to ask a few questions, one to each of the panelists first to kind of warm us up, and then we'll take some questions from the crowd. Bob, when you think about what factors go into whether a university should decide to use privatized dorms versus self-funding, how do you sort of think about those questions?
Well, as you and I discussed last week, it's kind of our capital versus OPM, other people's money for someone else's capital. So we actually started, we have a project going on now in Lancaster Avenue. We started this in 2010 thinking we would use other people's money, and we went out with an RFP and we got about 6 proposals in, and then started analyzing the results, and ended up kind of changing midstream. We had a lot of input. As you said, there's a lot of constituents out there. We have board members, we have backroom discussions, we have frontroom discussions, we have public discussions. So it came down to a question of our money or someone else's money. In the end, we were hoping to get this project off of our balance sheet, off of our credit, but that turned out not to be possible. If there's any rated people in the audience, you can speak to this better than I can, but it turned out that for us, because of its location and because of how strategic it was, and because we were not likely to let a project like this fail because it's in the middle of our campus, it would be considered on balance sheet on credit. So no matter how we tried to slice it with a third party, it would end up being on our credit. And so then you start looking at the cost of capital, and it was cheaper for us. Another concern was if we went to a third party and we developed a higher end, fully with all the amenities type dorm complex, we may end up having students who couldn't afford the newer dorms and would be in the older dorms, which are much lower rated in terms of amenities and creature comforts, and, for example, don't have air conditioning. So we didn't want to have haves and have-not. We're part of an Augustinian Catholic community here, and part of our ethos is our community. So we want to try to treat all people equally. Although at Haverford, my neighbors down the street, they have air conditioning in some dorms, but they don't turn on the air conditioning for any students so that they're all treated equally. They only turn the air conditioning on in the summer, because all their dorms are not air conditioned. So they take it a step further. We're not that draconian. The building has it. Although we started down the path of third-party development, we ended up, because of financial considerations and community considerations, deciding to do it ourselves.
Gotcha. Well, Rhonda, you're involved in, a lot of public-private university deals. What do you see coming down the pike? What's changing?
Well, for one thing, the deals seem to be getting bigger and bigger. I think that for a number of years, there were plenty of projects that were probably, 500, 700 beds, 300 beds, a lot of apartments that were done, a lot of them throughout the southeast, south, on the west coast, those places. But the projects are getting really big now, and I think part of that is because a lot of residence halls need to be replaced. And so you get to project sizes that are 1,000 beds or 2 phases of 700. They're big, and there's a lot of other spaces that are being combined with the student housing RFPs, such as UC Merced. There's a lot of academic and research space. They're basically doubling the size of their campus, and when they do that, of course, they have to think about their housing and their food service and everything that will provide service for that. So they're getting bigger, more complicated. They take a lot of large players, big general contractors, to be able to do those kinds of things quickly with a lot of capability. So that's one of the bigger things that I've noticed.
Chuck, you guys are designing a lot of these products. So what do you see in the give us a kind of an overview, kind of a market perspective on sort of what's the student debt and online learning? How could these impact student housing?
Well, it's an excellent question, and my crystal ball is as good as anyone else's. But the thing that we're seeing, and this has been stated explicitly by some institutions who have a strong online presence, is they're saying in their strategic vision for those students who still want a residential experience, and their parents too, because Paul, as you mentioned at the beginning, having that connection to our college years is very strong. So they're actually stating in their strategic vision that they want to create the best residential experience possible for their students. And I think it's more than just sort of people storage and housing students. And like Rhonda, like you mentioned, a lot of these projects are now incorporating other functions and pieces. And the reason why is because they're trying to foster community and connections between students, which leads to higher retention.
Got it. So marketing the university and the housing experience. As a father of a college-age student, I saw that came in, saw the dorm, had that sort of vaguely cabbage smell, kind of security that felt like you're walking into Guantanamo. And, it was an immediate turnoff for the young consumer on that college. And it was just about the housing. So, interesting.
Paul, can I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
When I arrived here just 12 years ago, we had a much larger number of commuters than we have today. So the residential experience, admittedly, is a different experience than if you commute. But when I grew up in this area in Drexel Hill, I have 5 siblings, and everyone commuted. I commuted my first year, and then I lived in the dorms. But 12 years ago, we had about 150 students per class out of 1,650. So about 150 were true commuters, lived at home with mom and dad. 12 years later, this current freshman class, we have 23. So students, especially for an expensive private school like Villanova, students want that experience of living on campus. And so we have a commitment to house 3 years worth of students, and we can't meet that commitment anymore, not because we lost rooms, but because more students want to come here and very few want to commute. So in our case, obviously community college, every school is different, but in our case, everyone wants that residential experience because it is different and it is part of the college experience.
And the other thing that we've seen as well, we're working on a master plan at an institution where even with their distance learning classes, they're finding that students are just doing the distance learning from their dorm room. So it's not that they're halfway around the world. They're literally on campus, but they're not going to class or just doing it remotely.
And we offer experience at Villanova. If you get a completely online degree, we have a graduation ceremony in the summer, and we let these students come in and live in the dorms for a week and then graduate. My goodness. And these are adult learners, and they just go nuts in the 1 week. They virtually all come. They all come. They all want to walk. They all want to be part of that on-campus experience. So.
Robert, let me ask you a follow-up question to my prior question. Villanova's decided to create their own dorm. And, on Lancaster Avenue, what were the key factors in sort of that decision? What drove the decision to do that?
So we survey our students almost excessively, but so the first thing we learned is that most of them would love to stay on campus for 4 years. Also, if you speak to the development people, they think that there's more of a bonding with the university, and they tend to be more generous givers if they have a positive on-campus experience than if they commute or if they live on campus and then move to an apartment. When we didn't have sufficient housing for our students to live here for 4 years, the story we told was, well, they come as a freshman, they live in dorm style, 2 in a room, common bathroom. Then they move up to on-campus, a little better location. Then they move up to apartments where you're poor, you have a kitchen, you can cook. And then in your senior year, you move off campus, so you get to experience negotiating a lease and paying your utilities. So it's kind of the cycle of life, the progression. But the surveys show they really want to live on campus. And so we also have a lot of input from these surveys about what kind of living arrangements, and they prefer by far the apartment or suite style. They prefer to be able to have a few friends over, so a living room and bedrooms. Although most of them don't cook, we have 75% of our students who live in apartment style still have a meal plan. So most of them don't cook, although they can make brownies or cook something at 2 in the morning when they come home hungry. So all those factors sort of pointed us towards having our own. And then for us strategically, when we speak to our neighbors, the largest complaint, we don't get a lot of complaints, but the largest complaints we get are about the students living in the neighborhood and the congestion they bring and the traffic they bring. So by bringing those students on campus, this is about a 1,200 bed complex, that takes 1,200 commuters off the street and on our campus. So right away, it's a decrease in traffic, decrease of students living in the surrounding community, a decrease of student cars. Radnor Township has a rule where you can only have no more than 2 unrelated adults in any one dwelling place. But most of them are large houses. Several of them don't fully subscribe to that. Might have 3 or 4 people living there. It means 3 or 4 cars. Because they're a little bit off campus, they want to commute. So the biggest thing we think we can do today for our in-house community and our neighbor community is to bring more students on campus. So all those factors together got us to do this.
Now I'm going to ask a question, and each of you, from your perspective as sort of developer, owner, and architect, I would like you to kind of focus on your perspective on it. What does it take to make a student housing project successful? Is it location? Is it amenities? What is it? What's the secret sauce that makes a student housing project? Rhonda, go ahead.
Well, proximity. We've talked about how people are wanting to be on campus and have that residential experience, but also a lot of the off-campus housing is focusing on, with walkable distances within a mile. So proximity to have that whole experience and be where it's happening, as opposed to a suburban or maybe a commuting experience. And then the experience itself in how the integration of housing and learning facilities, bringing those things together with social spaces that really bring that whole experience together, I think is another thing. And then, affordability is still, it is a factor. We still have come off from this, this terrible recession, and our economy is still recovering. There are still a lot of families that are underwater and, accumulating a lot of debt. And so, I think one of the surprising things to me is that there isn't a greater sensitivity to that with regard to the cost of housing. But I wonder if that isn't a lag time. But I know for some students and families that affordability is really key. And I think paying attention to that helps preserve the on-campus experience going forward into the future.
Chuck, what does it take to make a project successful?
You got to have really good self-service and excellent Wi-Fi. But we have heard that is one of the major issues on post-occupancy surveys that where students have had problems. That is a key to making sure. But really, beyond that, I think it's recognition that this is going to be a student's home. And certainly ideas like having single occupant bathrooms are key. You're not seeing any of the sort of gang bathrooms that you may have had in residence halls in the past. There are also amenities, some that are kind of interesting. Like we've seen ones like a group kitchen that might be on a first floor building. They become very popular. It's a place where students might gather for group study, then also make a meal. And it's kind of, again, it's like that home concept. It's a place that they can gather, similar to a house.
Robert, what does it take to make a project successful?
Well, I agree with my colleagues. I think the location and the style of living. I mentioned our new project is mostly suite style. We survey our students, and the vast majority have never shared a bathroom growing up, so they don't want to come to a college and share a bathroom with 50 of their neighbors. I grew up with 5 siblings in a row house with 1 bathroom, but not many people are doing that today. So single bathrooms or private bathrooms and the ability to have the amenities. Cell phone service, we had poor cell phone service in parts of our campus. We augmented the cell phone company's reception and added repeaters and things to improve that cell phone service. And the Wi-Fi is a constant issue. And the whole discussion currently is wired or wireless or both. So, wireless is in vogue, but the gamers like the larger bandwidth.
Yeah, we have to get that right. There's no, us a lot of problems that we don't.
Let me take a couple questions from the audience just to kind of keep it going here. Who's got a good question? Yeah.
I've heard at other conferences, and as Chris described, the palaces that some private developers have built at other colleges. I mean, is that a necessity to build? Well, I'll say the palaces. I understand the private bathroom or partial private bathroom or the suite-looking type of places. I have 2 kids approaching college shortly, and I'm saying they're the study, not and earn a degree, not to live high on high off my money for the next 7 years. I grew up
everybody get the question? It's the arms race. Do we want to talk about the arms race? Rhonda.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that we've come off from a development and building boom where what your peers have as from an institution. I'm a private developer, but I know there are comparisons made peer to peer to make sure that you can compete. So there's a bit of market positioning from my observation. As the developer who works in P3 relationships, we start off with a market study that discusses the rents that can be afforded. And, there's a range of that. And so we have to develop a project that fits within the rainfall of those rents. But I will say that, as I get into the development processes, it's usually me and developers trying to pull back because we're trying to keep everything in the box and make sure that, the financing and everything goes smoothly. But there's a lot of push for amenities and, and more spaces that perhaps there aren't enough tax dollars to build, and so they get pulled into the projects. So it's needs and wants and desires that get pulled into that. Market studies for P3 relationships usually define the upward limit of that. But then the other thing that, like I said, I think there's peer comparison. We've just come off from a tremendous building boom, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
And they're trying to position to compete.
Robert, what's your perspective on the arms race?
Our arms race is at a more basic level. Today we don't have enough supply, so we're trying to build beds. We have anywhere between 100 and 200 students in forced triples because we don't have enough. So that's a real competitive disadvantage. A room built for 2 with a shared bathroom, now put 3 in there, leads to a lot more roommate conflict. So we're trying to have adequate supply. And I would say we're putting more money into the aesthetics and the exterior and the look of the place and trying to build 50-year buildings. So we're less focused on amenities and more on durability and how will these dorms last, and we don't have to go spend a lot of money in operations every year during turnover. So our focus is on adequate supply and the right type, the right style, private bathrooms as opposed to the gang.
Chuck, how do you feel about infinite edge pools and jacuzzis?
I love them. I do think that there is starting to be a change in the philosophy, and on 2 of our most recent projects, we have universities who are now looking at the accountability of where funding is going and saying, show me where the result is. And what this particular institution has found is that students who live in a particular type of community arrangement actually have higher GPAs than students that live, let's say, in a suite arrangement. So this institution is looking very, very carefully at saying, wait a minute, are we building the type of housing that is ultimately benefiting our students and making them more successful? So I think it's going to be an interesting time moving forward in terms of as more of these studies are done, it's going to, there's accountability for dollars spent. I think that's across higher ed, not just in housing.
Well, let's turn the question on its edge. What are the barriers, Rhonda, getting a deal done? I mean, give us a perspective on sort of what goes wrong in getting from an idea to a project.
Well, the projects are large. There's no flat vacant land, that's just all sitting there waiting for you, ready to go. So you have to do, a fair amount of demolition and certainly dealing with the site and what's under it. So you have to have swing space to be able to come out and be able to roll these big projects. So a lot of the projects are having to go up because there's less land, and so when you go up, the cost goes up, and so do the rents and the costs relate well to one another. The parking issues that go along with that, if you have to put structured parking into that, and how that all fits, and maybe a school or university has not charged for parking before, and all of a sudden you have to build parking. I think that presents a unique challenge. And I'll say, when you, as a private developer, if we actually own the assets on a ground lease, we're often, not always, but often subject to real estate taxes. So that is a tremendous cost that is infused into the project. And in those kind of financings, we're also then become subject to in the entitlement processes in the community. And, depending on how close you are to neighboring areas, the activism that's associated with that can make it challenging as well.
The dreaded town and gown issue.
Yes. We're all very tenacious,
Gotcha.
though, and you just
Gotcha.
kind of stick with it and try to find ways to, help everyone win.
Robert, give us your perspective on kind of barriers or landmines to getting stuff done in the student housing space.
Our biggest barriers were, as you mentioned, parking and approvals. So for us, for parking, we charge $75 a year to park. And so none of our developer partners were interested in parking. Rates even double.
Surprising. That's
So,
surprising.
So that was an issue for us. So we'll obviously have to self-fund the parking. But if you just look at the residence halls, the township approvals have been a challenge for us. We're right up against some neighbors who are very interested in what we do. This particular site on Lancaster Avenue is strategic for us because if you haven't been here before, you drive down Lancaster Avenue, you see the sea of 1,700 cars. It looks like a commuter school, which we are far from a commuter school today. So we wanted to build it there. It's also the largest and only adequately sized parcel of land that we own that's buildable today. So that was another factor driving us there. And we started on December 9th of 2011 with our first submission to the township, and it's 2015, and we're still working on township approval. So it's been a challenge. The township has worked with us. We are working our way through. One of the things they insisted on, which I think is good for us and for them, is a bridge over Lancaster Avenue. So we've made some changes. Height, we have a 38-foot height limitation. So there's all kinds of regulatory and ordinance.
Barriers.
The two that you've hit on are really it, and understanding in the community what those town-gown relationships are, and sort of even what the history of project approvals is, I think is a key to understanding that going in. I think Bob, you also mentioned earlier, how's the zoning code written? Is the zoning code acceptable the way it is? What kind of variances are needed? All those types of issues take time to work out with the community and just adds to the approval process, period.
Well, let me take another question from the audience. Who's got a good question? Yes.
I have a question for the investor developer, and how in your pro forma do you account for the additional costs associated with management and FF&E and repairs and maintenance that relate to the more intensive use of student housing versus, say, typical multifamily housing?
We have budgets for all of that. Actually, I know that the thought is that students are that much harder on property than, say, everybody else. I don't know that I share that viewpoint. And I started off in the management end of this and kind of evolved into the development end of it. And it's I think part of the issue is that you have a high density living in smaller spaces. So imagine the traffic that goes over the same piece of carpet or flooring, corridors. They're high traffic. Are they treating it any differently? I don't think so. I mean, some people are complete slobs, and others are very, very neat and reflective of all of society. it's that much different. And then I learned in management that, you treat students with respect. You're there to help them and their families and help them have a good experience. And the way we as property managers treat the property is how they'll help us maintain it. So you're either good at that or not, and the results roll from there. But I think of it in operating budgets. We always have standard lines for just the regular routine kind of repairs and maintenance. And in addition to that, which is something actually developers have had for a long time, which are both operating reserves and repairs and maintenance reserves for those big projects when you have to start replacing roofs and things like that. And so that's just kind of the way the real estate industry tends to think of things. And I think we brought some of that same way of thinking actually to universities, which a lot of those budgets were over here, the revenues over here, and so forth. And I understand how that would evolve and why that even makes sense. But we relate it to, and the only way we can get financing is to show that we have a plan to operate and maintain and a reserve to take care of big things that has an automatic, share of rents go to it, so that can keep growing to take care of the building as it ages.
Chuck, anything different in terms of design to address this wear and tear and turnover aspect between an apartment and a dorm?
One of the interesting things that we've done on a couple of projects is actually having all of the mechanicals be able to be accessed from the corridors. And the reason we do that is because you typically would need a maintenance person to be accompanied by security personnel, which obviously drives cost. So by having things that are able to be maintained from the corridor, then you don't have that issue, which helps with on those ongoing costs.
Gotcha. Robert, any questions or comments on the maintenance factor? We still think concrete block is a great finish in the interiors. It's a
Mine
really
is neon yellow.
Yeah. That sort of foam green.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I spent my first 20 years in the military building barracks. And
Good experience with
finishes.
student housing.
Yes, but I think, as Ron was mentioning, I think that these facilities do get super heavy wear and tear, a lot more use than, say, your home or other comparable spaces. We find more problems in the common areas, so we have gone with prison-grade light fixtures in some hallways and certain dorms. But I think in their living space, in their apartments, in their rooms, they tend to treat that more like home. And again, if the building is well maintained and well cared for, then they tend to mimic that. If it's in disrepair, then it tends to get in total disrepair. So it's a vicious circle. So we try to keep them maintained at a pretty high level. And it's difficult with occupied rooms and entering students' rooms. We don't allow ourselves or anyone in students' rooms before 10 a.m. because they're nocturnal and no one's getting up before that.
Yeah, the chipboard is a great point. We actually had to do a study on blue sticky tape that you can put posters and things up. Again, in the old days when it's just block and it's painted, it comes off no problem. But depending on the type of chipboard you have, with the type of paint you use and the type of sticky you get different results for how that pulls off. So it's one of those little tiny things that you might not think of right away, but it's critical.
Let me change the focus a little bit, and this question will probably be more relevant to the owner and developer. But let's talk a little bit about that developer-university or developer-institution relationship. How does that work? What are you seeing in it? What makes it work and what makes it not work? Let's take Robert first, and then we'll come back to Rhonda.
Well, I think that the developers, because they're in this business, have become expert in what's wanted and needed in the market today. And we are not in that business. We might build a dorm every 10 years or so, or every 20 years. And so we're not really keeping up with what's current, what's the state of the art. So they bring a lot of knowledge in that space that we don't have. And the other areas in the funding, we've, as Paul and I were discussing, we go back and forth whether we choose our capital or someone else's capital because we have limited capital. And is it right to spend that limited capital on dorms? There are so many other needs. Should we be focusing on labs or classroom space? And we don't have enough to do everything. And we're private, so we have a little more leeway. But as Paul hinted at, the state procurement system are very restrictive. I think gone are the days when central funding from the state of Pennsylvania would be used to build dorms. I think that will probably never come back. So you're forced to use a third party or through cooperative arrangements with organizations that have a different name but support your university. So in some cases you're forced to use a third party because you just will never get the capital. In other cases, I think we would choose to use a third party because they bring a lot to the table.
Rhonda, I'm feeding you a real softball now. What makes a good developer?
What makes a good developer? A straight shooter who says what they're going to do and do what they say they're going to do. I think the relationship can be, at least at the beginning, like any new relationship, kind of tentative, and here you are trying to do this, multi-million-dollar deal in a very short period of time, and everybody's concerned and how we're going to work together. We have risks in that too, to deliver on time within a budget, so it's all kind of tentative, but it's about relationship building and sharing of information and frequent communication on a regular basis and kind of walking through a process. And from the university side, having a project manager that has some kind of a real estate understanding or facility understanding and can bring together the stakeholders, I think, on within universities, and that can be a vast number of people that need and want and should have input into the process. So it's a big group, and but I think with process and just open communication, we want to help the universities get to where they want to go, and to bring everything we can to bear to do that.
Gotcha. Well, Chuck, you're like the referee in these boxing matches. What makes a good relationship between an owner and a developer?
Well, I think one thing that's critical is for the developer to understand the university culture a little bit. I know sometimes in commercial development where you may only have one or two people who make the decision, and that's who you're working with. But at a university, there are many constituents, there are many stakeholders, and so, like Rhonda mentioned, having that open communication, understanding that the process might take a little longer, but to build consensus and make sure everyone's on board is a key to making it a success.
Yeah, stepping out of my role as moderator for a second now, because on a selection committee, they came in, the book says, our proposal to the Penn State University. It didn't go very well. So knowing your client is an important fact. Knowing your client, it's important. I would just say that's important. Let me take another question. Who's got a good question? Pooja, you got a good question?
Sure. Thanks.
Oh, you have a bad question.
I'll try my best.
Okay,
I guess I've heard about how universities separate their real estate in terms of, especially public universities. I'm sorry if this is a little bit off topic, but public universities separate their real estate into foundations or other entities. How does that affect the student housing space, and does that allow more flexibility?
I'll try. Yeah, it does allow a lot more flexibility. There are some decisions to be made. Is that particular piece of housing managed separately, or is it in the lottery, so to speak, that the university runs? So those kind of management decisions have to be made. I've seen it work both ways. The foundation, the basic benefit of the foundation is it's not the university's money and it's not the state's money, so they can do other things. They can procure in a lot more timely manner, and a lot of the rules that some of the states like Pennsylvania have with multiple primes, all that goes out the window. So there are some significant benefits in terms of how they procure. And in my opinion, that alone is the motivation to do it through the foundation, not through the state. So.
Ron, any thoughts on that? You come across one of these deals with a foundation that's sort of peripheral to the university, where they have their own board, and their own balance sheet, and their own land?
All the time, and it's a little bit, it's a little bit different. I mean, there are national foundations that can be involved in these transactions too, because sometimes universities, for whatever reason, do not want to use their existing foundation. I think if universities do, it probably costs less because there's a lot of fees associated with the national foundations to do the services, et cetera, that they do. But I've also worked with, foundations that are not mere, some are almost like pass-throughs. They're a conduit to allow something, this transaction to occur. And other foundations have a head of real estate. I work with SUNY ESF up in Syracuse, New York. They had a very sophisticated group, and they really drove the process. And the university was certainly involved, but the manager was from the foundation. So it's really kind of a broad spectrum of the way a university perceives it, or even what they need. But if they need a national foundation, there are good ones out there, and several of them now that can perform that role.
Did that answer your question?
Yes,
Perfect.
definitely. Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit now about two themes: technology and sustainability. In order, Rhonda, talk a little bit about technology and the product of student housing, and where does sustainability fit into the developer's framework?
I think it would be an interesting question, particularly for an architect, because I think there's so many interesting materials and modular components and electronic components. And I'm just amazed when I think about some of the changes that have occurred in student housing, the materials that are available and the level of manufacturing that is brought into that can be assembled as opposed to building it on the site, and the quality of control that comes into that, and the look. How about all these multiple, finishes, both interior and exterior, and how fun is that? I think it's pretty interesting looking. And then, the technology for things that make it more sustainable in terms of reducing utilities, whether it's, geothermal generation for utilities. Everybody is interested in keeping the utility costs down or negating it altogether. So producing your own energy on the site, and the technology exists to do that. There are plenty of good groups out there that are willing to do it and bring their own capital to the process to do it. So I think that's really interesting. It's sort of a big change. And I'll just throw in modular, whether it's modular bathrooms that can be brought in, or whether it's modular completely. I did that at SUNY ESF too. They wanted to do modular because of the sustainability factors, less waste, etc. So we would frame modular up there, and thank goodness we did, because they had a historic winter storm, and we were under cover before all that hit. So I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, developers are quick to adopt new technology, particularly when it has impact on either operating cost or capital cost or both. So, Chuck, what's your perspective on technology and sustainability?
I think the two are actually tied together. What's interesting about sustainability is there's been some projects are really good and really sustainable, but there's also an element of greenwashing at times, and it's easy to buy bike racks and things like that to get points. But I think what's really starting to happen in the industry, and I think 5 to 10 years out, we'll absolutely see this, is net zero design, where it's a very simple equation, right? The amount of energy that's needed and can be produced on site at the end of the year, has the building is at net zero, and it's easy to measure. So I think that's where the push is, and technology is certainly part of that. Being more sophisticated about energy modeling. How can you reduce the size of your mechanical plant, which is going to, again, help with those utility costs by using a better envelope, exterior envelope to the building, by using better glass. All those types of things weigh into those factors and create a more sustainable environment. I think, too, on technology, how the students perceive the space. For example, again, this is related to mechanical systems, but we've done a project recently where, because of LED lighting, the lighting now changes depending on what mode the building is in. So if it's in cooling mode, the lights are showing blue. If you can open your windows because the system is not on or it's just providing ventilation, the system is in green. It's heating. So there's a connection between what the users are experiencing, the students are experiencing in the building, and what the building is actually doing. So that technology continues to get more sophisticated, and I think will continue to improve over time.
Robert, technology, sustainability, how do they play at Villanova?
So I see technology in two ways. One is in the construction, and two is in the the amenities of the building. So in the construction, as you mentioned, modular is fantastic. Also, for advantage to us is less time on site. So the modules are built off campus, and we're always trying to get everything done in the summertime. So that's an advantage. Inside the building, if you haven't been in a dorm lately, we have all kinds of wireless ways to get into your dorm. Villanova has a card, a wild card, that's your ID card, your meal plan, your credit card, your dorm entry, everything. And now with wireless, you can also use your cell phone if you're within so many feet with the GPS. If you're within so many feet of your dorm, you can unlock your door with your cell phone. So all kinds of opportunities. Gives us some tough decisions to make. Do we go with wired or wireless Wi-Fi for the rooms? There's pros and cons. Do we do the door locks that have the batteries, or the ones that have the wire through the door frame? There's a lot of decisions to be made, and how long will that technology be around before it's replaced with the next generation? So a lot of decisions, myriad decisions. On the sustainability side, our corporate goal is to be a LEED Silver for all of our buildings. We've retrofitted a number of doors recently. It's been difficult because we've put in air conditioning where there was none before. So immediately we're using more energy, so it's tough to get to that net zero, and we have old, different technologies, steam, heat, central steam, those kind of things. But it gives us lots of opportunities. Our particular site is almost 100% impervious parking lot, and we're going to put in a lot of stormwater management where there was none. We're going to put in a cistern. We use the water for our cooling towers, which use a ton of water. If you've never looked at calculations, how much water a cooling tower uses. So we have all kinds of opportunities. We also have an engineering school. We're using professors and students in the design process to a limited extent, but especially in the stormwater area, which gives us another learning opportunity. And for the student to be able to say, they're not, unfortunately, the current students aren't going to be able to live in these dorms, but they're able to say, I was involved in the design of that dorm, so it gives them some buy-in and some skill.
Gotcha. Let's take another question. What do we have over here? Anybody?
I have a question.
Kevin.
And mainly for Robert, and from the university side. It really is two questions. One is, in the 10, 12 years you've been here, how much has the student housing or the residents that Villanova offer become a part of your competitiveness or the decision making and trying to go out and recruit the best students, to bring them into the university? And then secondly, as the student housing has evolved and become palaces, as somebody mentioned, obviously the cost to construct and develop them have gone up. Therefore, the cost for the rent, has to go up, pretty much the same way. And how does the university approach that? Again, as part of being competitive, and then also trying to keep, in check every student's coming out with a lot of student debt, and that's becoming a national problem as that affects new housing markets and all the way through that. So sort of a two-part question.
Did everybody hear the question? The trade-off between capital and costs, and how does the university, the sort of brand of the university and the quality of the product fit together? That kind of can summarize it. Let's take Rob.
So I'll do the cost first. We're very conscious of the cost, and I would say we do extensive market analysis to determine what cost we should charge for dorms, not necessarily the new dorms. Of course, we have to pay the mortgage, but on the older ones, they're built, some of them are 70, 80 years old, so it's more of a market, what the market will bear, whether institutions are charging. We look at our competitive schools, and we want to be in the middle, so we set our tuition, room rates, all that, based on partly our budget, but partly what the market will bear. We also have a range of options for our students, from single rooms to double rooms to quads, suites, apartment style, et cetera. So there is a range of prices and a range of options for the students, and we want to maintain that. We don't have one size or one price fits all. Back to the competitive side of things, I think my colleague was saying is very true about the living and learning community. So we advertise ourselves as having living and learning communities for freshmen and sophomores. So if you have a particular interest of study, we have leadership, we have environment, we have arts, we have politics, and we have living learning communities where you live in a dorm or a portion of a dorm, say a wing of the dorm, with like-minded individuals, and there are a few classes that are taught in that building by a faculty member who's assigned to your group as your, I wouldn't say dorm mom, but someone who helps you in your adjustment to college and in your academic life. So that's one of our competitive advantages in living learning communities, although many schools now have them. Some students choose to stay with that group as they move through 4 years, others don't. But it gives them an option, and also a way as a freshman to have a group of instant friends. You're already in a group besides your roommate and the people in your orientation group. One of the students' biggest concerns is finding and meeting friends and having a group they can go to eat with, so they're not sitting alone in the cafeteria. So this living learning community gets them connected right away. Our colleagues down the street, I'll pick on Haverford again, they have 87 faculty residences on campus, and one of the things they're known for is that faculty members will have class in their living room. So we don't quite have that. We have no faculty residences on campus, luckily, but we do have these amenities of various sizes. So more than the amenities, it's the community form. So we're designing this new series of dorms, basically 2 buildings, but each building is broken up into a number of wings on purpose, and it's not easy to get from one to the other. Again, we're trying to create community within this larger 1,100 bed dorm complex. So each student's area, we have a name in the area, but we'll have an identity and we'll have their own entrance and exit, and we'll be separate from the rest. So it's not just a giant complex of interconnected buildings.
Rhonda, your perspective on this kind of rent and capital question. I mean, developers, I think, are very savvy about, does a bike rack more important than a study lounge? And, what do I have to pay for, an infinity edge pool? There's some trade-offs. Can you comment on sort of your perspective on capital and rent?
Well, it all starts with the local market. And, and that is very different. If you're in the southeast or in this northeast corridor in highly urban settings. So we use a number of market consultants, just like universities do, to try to identify what the rents are in the area, what the amenities are in the area, the unit styles, and all of those things that are relevant to the rent themselves. And if you're working off campus in particular, you have to understand the positioning of, you're putting in a new project there and you don't want to be outmoded the moment that you open your doors. So there has to be something unique about it. And so I think that kind of lends itself, if you will, to the amenity wars, is trying to come up with something that will be a standout for a number of reasons. And then on campus, where you have a lot of residence halls, not to say that there aren't apartments, and then if there are apartments for grad staff and staff, you've got to really compare it to the local market and what's off campus. Residence halls, you're looking at it in relationship to the existing residence halls that are on the campus, and working with the universities to understand who their peers are, and then you study that. And market consultants help you understand that as well. But we'll look at units and things of those competitors, as well as make a good study of what the campus itself has, and understanding of what they're trying to do and accomplish. And then, with the third-party market study, we know the rents that can be charged, and then it's a matter of, well, to the university, this is the max. Let's not start there, because usually we find out things about sites, things that add costs, and we don't know what interest rates will do, and so we need to go into this conservatively and fit within the rainfall of the revenues that have been projected to make sure we're not outside the box to begin with. So that's why I look at it.
Chuck, you're on the front line of your client's requirement to fit a budget. Talk a little bit about these trade-offs between kind of the cost and the amenities that people seem to want.
Well, it's an ongoing process, and certainly everyone comes to the table with a whole series of wants for a project. And I think the key is really working as a team all the way through the process, having accurate costs up front as we're working through the design to really optimize and figure out what the developer. I mean, as the architect, we certainly have ideas and suggestions about what we believe are the spaces that make the most sense, but I think where developers are really valuable is on that understanding the market value of those. And so really it's developing it over time through the life of the project to keeping at that number and making sure we can provide a project that's going to be successful.
Let's take a question from the crowd. Yeah, sir.
It was a little late, so I don't know if this was addressed, but I'm going to try and play accountant for a second. NASB changes, has that impacted the economics? And kind of my understanding, either bed guarantee or master lease, if you guys enter in those types of transactions, that kind of looks and smells like a mortgage, and it goes from a footnote to an actual liability, which in the past perhaps was a way for you to circumvent that liability on your balance sheet, which may change your credit rating, which may change the ultimate cost of capital. I'll stop rambling. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but I'm not.
Robert, you have a point of view on that?
And Mr., what was the first acronym you said there?
FASB, the accounting.
Of the accounting rules?
Accounting rules.
So as I mentioned at the beginning, for us, the main decision was our capital or someone else's capital. And we were hoping that it could be off our credit, off our balance sheet. But in our case, because of the strategic location, because we would not let the project fail, because the land is right in the middle of our campus, none of the credit agencies would view it as off credit. So for us, and lower cost of capital, it was sort of a no-brainer for us to decide to self-finance. We also talked about the pros and cons of using your money for a dorm project versus a lab project or a classroom project or something else. So always have that balancing up for us. It's a strategic need to have adequate housing, enough supply, which we don't have. So all those factors led us to decide to do it with our own capital and do it in-house.
Rhonda, your thoughts on the kind of accounting gimmicks or balance sheet presentation from the developer or university side?
Yeah, we have to keep up with that, and I'm not aware of any real changes at the moment, but
Okay.
who knows? There's, I think, the last really significant change that brought about a lot of the white papers, I think, in 2010 from the ratings agencies, basically any kind of student housing project that's done in a P3 relationship has to be recognized from a balance sheet perspective. There doesn't seem to be any off-balance sheet, kind of situation. But if you're working with a private developer, and I bring all the capital, 100% of the capital, how can that reflect negatively on your credit? So that seems like the other extreme of this. Then the ratings agencies, there's no firm rules, there's not a one rule applies to all. They're going to look at the details of each project. They're going to look at the financial situation of the institution, the strength of its management team, and a whole bunch of factors, and determine how that relates to the credit, whether it's at all or 20% or 60% or whatever. So, there's that working relationship, I think, with the credit agencies as universities go through that process to understand what it's going to mean for them. And I think that part of that discussion is best had before a university goes out with a project, to have, at the business office level, to understand those variables so that the request can match the business needs of the institution as well as the practical ones, and then they can come out with I think, pretty successful request.
That was a great question. I feel like I need to sit down and get out of my moderator role because I found something I actually know something about. The short answer is there are no more gimmicks. Sometime in that financial crisis, both the rating agencies and the accounting firms found a backbone. They used to have a category called indirect debt, which was sort of this gray zone. It was either not on credit or on credit. This is also set against a trend right now. I know for the first time, so somebody from ACC in the room, American Campus Communities, when they did the Drexel deal, and they brought in the concept of having 75% loan and 25% equity, like it was a new brand of soap. Like, this is revolutionary because, again, the student housing generally was 100% debt financing and revenue bonds. But they sold this thing like, wow, the first time we actually have some skin in the game. From the perspective of a private university, that's great because the rating agencies will ask the question, if it hits the fan, who owns it? And the question is, sure as heck, a guy that's got 25% of the value in equity is going to fix the problem, fix the rents, improve the building, do whatever they have to do, because it's sure as heck the developer that owns it, not the university. And those have been, I think, two of the big sea changes over the last 10 years, is this rise of kind of bona fide developer equity in the student housing space, and the kind of wringing out of all the gimmicks on the accounting rules and master lease rules. Though, when I go to Georgia and I look at this weird thing where they're doing this annual appropriation, I don't understand that at all. We are beginning to press up on our time here. I do want to ask see if there's a couple more questions, if we can have a lightning round. Yeah, go ahead.
So when you're analyzing all the amenities, what is the middle ground you're trying to hit between cost per square foot and the rent?
A middle ground. Well, it's different.
What is the relationship you're trying to hit between cost per square foot of your development and the rent you're going to charge your student?
What amenities really matter when you think about your budget?
Well, you have to have a place in I'll just use the example of a residence hall. You have to have places where students can get out of high-density rooms where they're sharing space, or they could be sharing space with others, to be able to get to a quiet space where they can study. There needs to be enough socialization space so people can hang out and get to know one another, get to know the broader neighborhood. And then you've got sports spaces, of course, like laundry, postage, offices for Res Life, and some of those kinds of things. So I think, the basic practical things I just mentioned. If you've got wireless, well, you don't have to go into a computer lab. You can use your computer anywhere you want, or your phone. So I always try to, in dealing with a residence hall, I usually think of circulation space units to the other spaces. That could include corridors, about 70-30. And I know it's probably going to grow. It very seldom goes down. You can work with those efficiencies, but I generally think that it's about 70-30 in terms of square footage between the non-revenue spaces and the
ratio.
Yeah, as a ratio.
Good, interesting. Lightning round. There was a question back here. Yeah, sir. Yeah, go ahead.
Kevin did the accounting. I'll do the law.
Law. Okay, good.
You're not just like any other landlord, whether it's private or the university. You have expanding litigation, sort of unknown Title IX implications. How does that impact planning, design, and then the management of a dorm where you have young adults that want more freedom, want more interactive space?
Robert, take that one on.
We make everyone sign a waiver. I assume all of you signed a waiver before you came. It's a tough battle. When I arrived here, we had one in-house counsel. We now have 4. So America is a litigious society, and I'll just leave it at that. I'm very biased.
Well, it is a management-intensive business, and as one who periodically gets calls from residents, it's just like any business. Your tenants are high maintenance, and they require a lot, and maybe students and their parents in particular are more than any. Another question, quick lightning round. Yes, sir.
My question is Rhonda and maybe Rob. I know you're doing your new project privately, but what are you seeing aside of, like you mentioned, the ACC project where they had capital in the game? Are you seeing universities request, further completion guarantees from the principals of the companies, or other type of kind of backstops to ensure that the project doesn't go up 40% and then the project goes on if the developer has other issues, and now the university is left with a half-built structure, and they now essentially have to take over the project or re-let the project, to get it to completion. So, are you seeing other types of insurances as a developer that the universities are requiring or requesting from you? And what, if anything, are you giving them?
Well, to my experience, no university is, and everybody has lawyers, bond counsel here. There's a whole bunch of lawyers in these processes, it seems, whether it's a tax-exempt bond transaction or a traditional debt and equity. But I think that I've never seen a project that doesn't have, some kind of guarantee. You guarantee construction and you guarantee the cost. In the end, you go through a process of determining the cost, the design with the university, until you reach a GMP that's near the closing date. And we have to, as a developer, that's our risk, and that's part of what you're offloading to us.
Who's guaranteeing it, though? Is it the parent company? Is it the principals?
It's not the principal. I've never seen the principals.
So when you say you're guaranteeing it, who's guaranteeing it? Because a lot of these projects, they're just set up with shell companies and, with their single asset, single purpose entities that really don't have anything other than what
Well, it'll have to be some entity with adequate balance sheet, that can show the wherewithal to be able to support it. From there, whether that's the parent or one of the entities, like I work for the Michaels organization as part of, and our company is University Student Living, but we're part of the Michaels organization. So we have a number of entities, and the Michaels Development Corporation is one of our bigger entities. So Michaels Development Corporation might be asked to guarantee for a project that USL is doing because of the size and magnitude. So, we look at those decisions internally, but we know we're going to have to support that. And then there are performance bonds, that are needed, like from the general contractors and things like that are normal. I can't even imagine a way today that a project could be left half done on a campus. There's no attorneys that would allow such a thing, and I would certainly be embarrassed if anything like that happened to one of my projects as a developer. That's not how I intend it.
Good. Did that answer the question? It's my job as the moderator to finish this thing on 9:45. So I have one last question. This is directed only to Robert. Who's going to have the best record in the Big Five this year? I got your pen in that stack. Okay, I'm going to hand it back to Paul.
So if everyone can, just thank our panel for Just have a few announcements. Please be sure to take an upcoming events sheet on our table out front. There's a lot of events that ULI is putting on. Our next event is a members-only roundtable, Gen X Comes of Age, Leadership Styles for the Next Generation. That's going to be held on February 18th, and there's a few spaces still left for that. Also, don't forget, the ULI Philadelphia Awards for Excellence are now accepting applications through March 6th, and postcards available for nomination information are also available at our table out front. And also, finally, applications are being accepted for the Future Leaders Scholarships. So if you know any undergrad or grad in a ULI-related field, please be sure to pass along the information for them to apply for that as well. Applications are available out front. And if you're not a member of ULI, please be sure to grab an information sheet. It's a great time to be a part of the organization, and you can continue coming to great panels like this one. So thank you all again for coming, and thanks again to the panel for a great discussion.